The Pittsburgh Steelers, they've done a lot in free agency, but there is one need that continues to stand out that I think all of us have somewhat pushed under the rug. Why? Because of words from the team itself. But when you look at everything, there's a need here, and it's a little pressing. What's going on, everybody? I'm Noah Strackbein. Thank you for jumping on to Steelers to Go, your daily to-go cup of Pittsburgh Steelers news and analysis. Find us on youtube.com/allsteelerstalk and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. And today, we're talking about wide receiver and the Pittsburgh Steelers' biggest need right now. The team, yeah, they have options, but those options are very limited. And a week and a half ago, the words of owner Art Rooney II held much stronger than they do today. I want to take you back. I want to take you back to Art Rooney's end of the year presser, I guess you could call it, where a bunch of us from the media sat in a room with him, no cameras. We were allowed to ask questions for about 20 minutes and just get the inside scoop on the Pittsburgh Steelers and how the team president and the owner view the offseason and where the organization is right now. And during that press conference, or during that media session, I should say, Art Rooney told me that the team feels very comfortable in the weapons that they have around Kenny Pickett. He was asked about wide receiver. He was asked about building weapons around his young quarterback. And his response was, we feel pretty good about the guys that we have here. And at the time, that held pretty strong. The Pittsburgh Steelers had Diontae Johnson, George Pickens, Calvin Austin, Gunnar Olszewski, Steven Sims, Miles Boykin. It looked like a room that was set to return and have more success and look to build off of what they were doing towards the end of 2022. As we sit here today, that is much different. The Pittsburgh Steelers are in a much different situation, a much worse situation. And in the grand scheme of things, when you look at the whole thing, the Pittsburgh Steelers' most pressing need right now, offensively, is wide receiver. You could say they need a defensive tackle. I agree with you. I would put that higher. You could say they need a third safety. I agree. I would put that on the list right there as well. I would say that you still need a third edge rusher if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers. I would put that on the list as well, but those are all defensive needs. On offense, the Pittsburgh Steelers right now, their biggest needs are a backup tight end, wide receiver depth, and then to find a replacement for Dan Moore Jr. But if all else fails and you head into the season with Dan Moore as your starting left tackle, it's not awful. It's not good, but it's not awful. If you head into the season with Diontae Johnson, George Pickens, Calvin Austin, and Gunnar Olszewski as your four wide receivers, that is awful. I continue to fall under the notion that the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to let Calvin Austin win that slot job. They're going to let him be the inside wide receiver because that was the plan all along. They want that plan to play out. I think the plan is worthy of playing out, and Calvin Austin will get the first and I think the biggest opportunity to make a name for himself in Pittsburgh this season, as long as he's healthy. But after that, the Pittsburgh Steelers have nobody because Gunnar Olszewski is not coming off a breakout season in the NFL at wide receiver. He's a very good blocker. And when he doesn't drop the football, he's an all-pro kick and punt returner. But there's questions there, and there's not much going on with him. And he's definitely not a name that you want as your only backup if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I don't even think that the Steelers need a player to come in here and replace Calvin Austin in the slot. I think that if you have another slot option, that's good. But I think in the grand scheme of things, what the Pittsburgh Steelers need the most right now is somebody to come in and provide some relief for Diontae Johnson and George Pickens on the outside and offer a third body that the Pittsburgh Steelers could actually utilize outside of the four that they already have and a backup that doesn't really do anything in the receiving game. Now let's look at some names. ESPN's Dan Orlovsky suggested Odell Beckham Jr. should sign with the Pittsburgh Steelers. It sounded crazy, right? Well, it is, to a degree. It doesn't make a lot of sense financially to sign a wide receiver to $20 million or $15 million a year or whatever the reports claim that Odell Beckham wants when he's coming off an ACL injury, hasn't played in a year, and is certainly nearing the second half, if not just the final few years of his career. Big gamble, worth it? I don't think so. But it does make sense to say, hey, they should go and get the biggest name on the market because they need another superstar to join the group and kind of rack up the talent at the wide receiver position. Because right now, the Pittsburgh Steelers are not a group that you look at and say, Kenny Pickett has the best weapons around him. The Pittsburgh Steelers are a group that you look at and say, Kenny Pickett has two really good options, a guy that has yet to play an NFL game at all, preseason included, and a guy whose primary purpose last season on offense was to run block, not catch the football. That is who Kenny Pickett has to work with at the wide receiver position right now. And to say that Odell Beckham Jr. isn't an option just because they have too much going on, that doesn't make any sense anymore. It did. At one point, it did. At one point, you could sit here and say, hey, the Steelers don't need a wide receiver. They probably just need a slot guy, but they have enough options. Today, we sit here, and that has changed. And it has changed drastically. And the more that you analyze it and the more that they let guys leave, the more that you realize maybe Odell Beckham Jr. isn't that crazy of a name to toss out there. There are more realistic ones, like McCole Hardman, I believe, is a realistic option. DJ Chark is a realistic option. Jarvis Landry is a realistic option. Brashard Perryman, Byron Pringle, Chris Conley, Dante Pettis, DeMarcus Robinson, Isaiah McKenzie. There are names out there, and plenty of them, that the Pittsburgh Steelers could sign. And I think at this point, you have to be looking at this list and saying, okay, what is the value of these guys? Well, if McCole Hardman is still an unsigned free agent and the guys around him who are in somewhat of the same age group and talent level are signing deals like 3 years, $25 million, 2 years, $12 million, you have to think Hardman's not going for 10 plus. And if he's not going for 10 plus, what is holding the Pittsburgh Steelers back from making a move like that? I'm sure that they do have their negotiations in place with a number of these names. I've heard that they've been looking at wide receiver. I've been told of a certain name that has recently signed elsewhere that they felt was a good fit, didn't work out. But that shows you, just like the Orlando Brown news, that the Pittsburgh Steelers are at least interested. So they have to be scouting out who's left on the board. And while there is a lot of names left on the board, very good ones that they could immediately pick up and improve this offense, if they're shooting for the stars, they're shooting for Odell Beckham Jr. If they're shooting for quality depth that they believe they could build on, a name like McCole Hardman is certainly the top of that list. And this is all before the NFL draft, because the Pittsburgh Steelers need to sign somebody. That's not a question. But at that point, you only have 5 wide receivers, and one of them doesn't really count. So really, you have 4 wide receivers that you feel confident in building something around that could actually catch the football. And then if you sign somebody, you have 4, you'll have 5 total, and then you head to the NFL draft. And in the NFL draft, as crazy as it sounds, Jordan Addison is still certainly a name in the first round. It's not one to overlook. I believe that the Pittsburgh Steelers truly do have their eyes on him to some degree, much like they have their eyes on Devin Witherspoon and Joey Porter Jr. and some of these guys out of Iowa like Jack Campbell. Trenton Simpson has caught their eye. But they have their eyes set on a number of players. Wide receiver, as much as we've all played it off and said, no, it's not going to happen, after the release of guys like Steven Sims and Miles Boykin hitting the free agency market and the Steelers got down to their only 4 options, you have to believe that maybe it is a little bit higher on their list than we anticipated. And maybe they're looking at their offensive line right now because they'd rather fill that position in free agency to allow them to go out and get the skill guys that they need in the NFL draft. maybe they're spending time at Iowa's Pro Day because they like Lucas Van Ness and Jack Campbell, and they believe either one of those defensive guys has a little bit more weight and can make a little bit more of an impact right now than a tackle that isn't ready to start or an offensive lineman that isn't ready to start. I still believe 17 holds strongest for a cornerback, but if Jordan Addison is sitting there, you have to question, especially if they don't sign anybody, is that a name that's coming to Pittsburgh? Because even if you want 4, and even if Calvin Austin is the guy that they want to be that starter on the inside, you want 4 wide receivers. You always want 4 wide receivers that you feel confident in. And right now, the Pittsburgh Steelers have 2.5. So it is a name. And Odell Beckham Jr. and Jordan Addison, as far-fetched and as crazy as both of those names sound, with all the needs that the Pittsburgh Steelers have and all of the big names that are still available in the NFL draft and in free agency, and all of the signs and the history of what we know about the Pittsburgh Steelers, as crazy as that all sounds, the Pittsburgh Steelers have a new GM who's got a little bit of a fire underneath them, who has shown that in the last 2 years. And they got a hole at wide receiver. And I would not be shocked if they start filling it and then they continue to fill it in the NFL draft.